How about now? Can you hear me?
That's better.
Okay, thank you. So yes, an opportunity to listen a little deeper, even when it's hard to hear, to strain and feel into what is wanting to be felt. For me, I find in this journey that there's so much that I'm still realizing wants to be felt, that I've hidden from myself around these experiences, that the riots after George Floyd brought up again. And what an opportunity to be able to go into these experiences and share them. So I would like to offer to all of you to share your experience, your felt experience in this world, being in the bodies, in the skin as these beings, as we are and relate to others. The struggles within that, the ease, possibly, if that's there as well. Whatever arises for you.
So I guess I'll start on this topic. Being in the skin that I'm in. Before I go there, I just wanted to make a quick correction. Yesterday, I called the group that I was referring to, that was kind of like kind of out in the streets along with Black Lives Matter and things like that. I called it NAFC, but it's actually NFAC. So I was just talking and my mind was just mixed up the letters. But yes, the NFAC, spearheaded by Grandmaster Jay, definitely check them out. They're really unifying a lot of people more around the yang principle of like kind of more like where like BLM tends to kind of have like a different kind of they're both non-violent in a sense, but like it's kind of just a different edge. It's kind of like the resurgence of the Martin Luther King movement, like the Civil Rights movement versus the Black Panthers movement. You know what I mean? They both had their elements, and they both were law abiding. It's just that they kind of just had different ways about approaching the issue at hand. But yes, being in my skin, I think I was made aware of it pretty young. Believe it or not, Michael Jackson, his skin color was changing as I got older, and and so I remember telling my mom I wanted to be just like Michael Jackson, and he had the good hair and stuff like that, and he'd wave it around and do his dances and stuff, and she's like, well, you need to stay out the sun then if you want to, if you don't want to get dark. And I'm like, man. And then I was like, God, okay, I gotta stay out this sun, but I love the sun. That's about, and we were actually in a religion at the time that talked about it was actually a pro Black religion, but the religion had some still colonialist, racist undertones to it, and it still talked about how beautiful Black people were before they went to the wilderness, and so I'm like, were. It's like, yeah, we used to be really beautiful, but we disobeyed God and went into like the jungle. And then that's when we became what we are. And I'm like, that is a terrible story. And I said it. Like, wow. The sort of undertone of the colonialist experience as well that came in there through the Nation of Islam, that told us that the white man was the devil, but at the same time, we weren't beautiful, when we went and disobeyed Allah and went into the jungle. So that's something that kind of was so you see, as a kid, you get in these mixed messages, you know what I mean? Like one minute, you're good, the next minute you're ugly. And then in school, there was issues. I had one teacher in particular tell me, hey, Montague, you're so smart. She's like, I can't give you anything challenging. Elementary school, she said, I'm all out of work for you. She was like, what is going? She said, you must have a lot of white in you.
Oh.
In second grade, I didn't know what white meant. And so I thought white meant good. And so I said, oh yeah, I do. And she goes, oh yeah, I can see it. I can see it. And so just those sort of micro things that kind of happen throughout life, it kind of all of a sudden hits you like a ton of bricks when the whole race thing starts making sense. You start seeing the patterns. and all the issues around it, it can really cause for a lot of for what you see in the streets today. So anyway, that's just a little bit of my experience.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's really getting into, you know, these things that maybe make us cringe, as Tyrone always says, like, let's have the real and maybe difficult conversations and say the things that maybe we don't share, but that vulnerability, I think, often can be a key, can be an opportunity to connect and to see things in a way that we haven't before, or somebody hasn't before, and really kind of, as the kind of hippie term, to grok it, to really get it into your soul. So I think that we all connect. You know, we're all human beings. Again, I was mentioning nonviolent communication. We all have these human needs for connection. If we can utilize that, if we can connect on a human level, then the conversation can come from there. And they're big about not shaming, not blaming, just saying, these are my feelings, this is what I need, and allowing for movement from there, which I have seen, and there's a lot of stories that the founder, Moshe Rosenberg, uses or tells about, really a lot of connection between warring tribes in Africa, and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and working with national leaders all the way down to personal issues with between spouses, you know, everything on this whole level. So really would love to hear that vulnerable sharing of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, sometimes our parents aren't very ready with the right responses. You know, sometimes, you know, because they same things, and they're like, hey, it's kind of like the way the world is, you know. And somehow, you know, some households it's just part of the culture, you know, to be like, hey, just do what your teacher says, just get that good grade in there, you know what I mean? You know, that's the only way out, is through this education. But at the same time, this education is the thing teaching me what to think and not how. And I had a vocal music teacher once. He pulled out, he said, we're going to do a little bit for Black History Month. We're going to start, I was a vocal music major. He said, we're going to pull out some sheet music. I was in 8th grade. He's like, we're going to sing the song called The Old Kentucky Home. And I remember he started playing the piano, and it was like, sing a song of the old Kentucky home where the darkies are happy and gay, you know. And all of us started laughing because we'd never heard Black people called darkies before, you know. We didn't know really how bad it was until, you know, we took it home, and then there was issues, you know, with that. But just the fact that could still surface in my era, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thought we're way far gone. And the teacher defended himself. He said, hey, this is real American history I'm teaching. You know what I mean? This is what we sang. This is how the slave masters perceived their slaves, as happy and gay. And so why should we take that piece of history out of the schools, you know? And so, of course, the blowback was, hey, man, we don't have to sing that song anymore. You know, we're not in we could beat you up now, or we can sue you now. We can get you back. Like, this ain't the old days. You can't beat me into singing that no more. This is a new time period. So, but just moving in that space in Denver, Colorado, and, you know, being the guy who was commonly, you know, commonly looking like a suspect, you know what I mean? That got old after a while, you know. Oh, you look like a suspect. Oh, you look like a suspect. You know, that happened tons of times. So, you know, so there is a difference in not being, and having people not being able to relate to that, or not even trying, or just saying, oh, that happens to everybody. You know, it gets wild.
Yeah, not trying to change it, and just, I mean, that's where we get to where we are now, is it hasn't been changed.
I remember as a child, Montague, this darkies expression in South Africa as well. And we had this Afrikaans language from the settlers, from the Dutch settlers. And the Afrikaans for dam is dom. And I used to hear a lot in growing up in different spaces this idea of blacks being called dom darkies, which is basically dumb darkies. And it was like, this is just how it is. But because they're not educated and because they don't speak your language, you know, there was just such a feeling of dismissal of this person being, again, like we were talking about earlier, hierarchy, being further down the ladder and not worth considering, not worth looking at, not worth seeing. You know, a very basic thing right now that I feel for me is this wanting to be seen, wanting to acknowledge someone else as well. And there's a generation, many generations of blacks who just were not seen and just dismissed.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing: is the colonization of our minds happened very young. I remember the media went out of its way to never portray Africa in a good way. Whenever Africa popped up on TV, it was like, oh, can you feed a child? You know, big bloated bellies. You know, people with flies in their eyes. You know, they would never show cities. They would never show scholars. They would never show the medicine people, the people healing, the mastery of the people. You know, in all its facets, it was always struggling. It was always flies in the eyes. It was always in these negative stereotypes. On the cartoons, they were always cooking white people. In the cartoons back in my time, they put white people in bowls. Bugs Bunny, all those guys, they put, on those shows, they put white people, the white travelers in bowls and dance around them with bones in their noses. And so it became this thing where the last thing you wanted to be was African, and it actually became a negative term in school. We'd say, oh, shut up, you're an African booty scratcher. Shut up, African booty scratcher. It became like this thing. It was like this thing. Oh, you ain't calling me no African, and there'd always be this reinforced big white lips, some weird little like cheetah cloth and like completely black. It was just this image that was pushed on us so young, and we didn't have the ammo to combat it until we were older, and we were brought into these Pan-African movements. And they're like, no, you've heard wrong. Like, Egypt is in Africa. We're like, what? Like, look at the mastery, look at the medicines, look at the legacy, Ghana, Maui, and Songhai, all this stuff. Like, we didn't know about. Look at Shaka Zulu. Look at all these people that were masters that aren't talked about. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea. And it can create the opposite reaction because you've been lied to your whole life. Now you're like, I don't want to know nothing about what y'all got to say. You know what I mean? And so, that's all part of the education we get in America, and it just doesn't help.
Yeah, as you're speaking, Zoe, I'm remembering being 8, and just let me just back up. I was watching these images from the 1960s when there was the racial integration period where Black people were being introduced into white institutions and schools, and watching the people around them react to this child going to school, and how much and how many police had to be there to protect this child. And that's not even the end of it, that person had to sit in that space, in that classroom, for however many years, being subjected to that. And I was remembering a time when I was one of those children here in South Africa. And because when the schools had to integrate at some point, we were the first wave of children that came to enter those schools where they hadn't had Black people before. And I think my body and my mind must have shut or kind of selectively forgot that, because I find that now so much of that is coming up for me, and remembering so many things during that time, especially now, as you're saying, the schools here now in South Africa, or the private schools here, are now uncovering all this racism that has been existing in the system. And one of the schools is a school that I went to, and I'm thinking all these micro racist things that happened to me while I was a child, and things that I was not conscious of. I didn't have any police to protect me, or and there are a lot of people in South Africa who came into the system in this way. And now when I look back on it, it's huge, so much violence in being in a system like that, where people have not been educated on how to deal with diversity, how to deal with complexity, how to be with other people of skin tones. And one of these memories, I actually got a memory when just now, beginning of the lockdown, when there was a clip of the army coming in to police everybody, this heavy policing again. And suddenly I remembered, I think I was 7, a time where I saw the army, we call them mellow yellows in South Africa, coming in. And I was transported back to that memory, because we knew that these army trucks were not coming to protect us. It was not about us. It was about something else. And we knew what tear gas was in our eyes at the age of 7. We knew that when they come, you run away. And these memories that start to be unearthed in our bodies are there. If we don't heal them, and they just keep on coming and being re-triggered all the time. And so all of this during this time, and the Black Lives Movement, has just been all these memories in my body resurfacing, and which is brilliant, because then it's time to heal, it's time to process, it's time to heal that trauma. But these are just some of the experiences that I just remember that stand out in the school system in South Africa. Oh my goodness, what we come from, and that's why also June 16, the youth, fighting for their rights to education that is excellent. We need access to equal education, and education that really propels us to be the best people that we can be. And so it's all these things. Yeah.
As you talk about that, I love what you're saying there, Zola, because think about how you experience those things, and we all experience the trauma as it recreates itself, right? As it comes out in a different form in today's society, or even in the same form. For me, I think of how that informs my raising of our children, how that informs how I inform them about trauma and racism and self-esteem, and those different items that I still struggle with myself, being a victim of those same things in the system, right? So if you're trying to make sure that you're valued, and that you have the worth, and that you're as good as the next person, and you're trying to overcome this trauma constantly, yet you have small souls, or even if you don't, and you have, you mentor people, or whatever the case may be, you carry that with you. How much of that gets communicated to those who are entrusted in your care? How much of that continues to come out to them, intentionally or unintentionally? I think about that all the time as we sit down and we inform our kids about what's happening in this world, and what they need to be prepared for as they go out into the world. Then on the other end, I got to make sure that they understand that they're valued, that they're worth it, that they're just as good as the next person, that, they have everything they need inside of them to succeed, even though the world is going to tell them that they don't have the same things as other people have. You know, it's just I feel like it's a constant battle and a constant struggle to continually experience and overcome, you know, what you have a physical reaction to because you've experienced it in the past. So powerful.
I think it's important to let them know that they're seen. I know growing up and being Afro-Latina and having two parents who have two different cultural backgrounds and not feeling like I quite fit into either. And so I never really felt like I was seen. Like no one ever had my same experience. So even, typically where I look more Black, I'm never recognized unless I'm in some place where there's Cubans or Puerto Ricans. That's, there's a large group of them. In Colorado, I'm never recognized as being Afro-Latina. And so I've had people speak Spanish, not knowing that I understand Spanish, even though I don't speak it very well, and talk about me being Black and say some racist things about me, about my Blackness, not knowing that I'm just as Mexican as you are. And then on the flip side, I've been in spaces where I've been told that I'm not Black enough. And what is your mom? And my mom was a product of the same type of upbringing I remember she said that she asked her dad, what are we? And he's like, whatever you want to be, baby. So she didn't know what her cultural identity was to a certain extent. So you're moving around not knowing what your history is, not knowing what legacy you're coming from. And from a small child, not having a female influence that had curly hair, who had my dark skin, who couldn't get out my mom, I remember thinking when I was a young child, she was able to get out the shower and her hair could just be. Like her hair, like she didn't have to do anything to her hair. I get out the shower and my hair's, I need product and conditioner. I need all these things. And when we think about our kids and me telling them, and my girls specifically, like, I love your hair. Your hair is beautiful. The curls, the way that they, they're tighter curls than mine. And look how amazing your hair can do things that my hair can't do. My hair has looser curls and my braids fall out and your hair stays, just letting them know that I see them and I may not look just like them, but I'm putting people around them in their space that have that same, that they can see themselves in, that are doing great things in the world, so they don't feel isolated and alone as they're moving through space.
Yeah, I'd like to also add to what Renika's saying. My daughter's father is Kenyan, and so she's also this kind of unique blend of me and him. And she also grew up in South Africa, where when she was about 2 or 3 and we'd be at the shops, people would come up to me and say, oh, is she adopted? And they would just say it like, as though she had no privacy, as though I had no feelings, she had no feelings. And I used to wonder if my daughter thought she really was adopted, because it was said over and over and over again, is your daughter adopted? Because she didn't look like me. And then when she was very little, at school, a little boy said to her, your hair looks like pubic hair. And she, from that day on, has never been able to love her hair, which is also beautiful and curly. And I just love her hair. And I tell her every day, your hair is amazing. And everyone tells her, and she straightens it and she scrapes it back, because that one comment when she was so young and so impressionable just like really pierced her heart, and it's still something she's working with. And the other thing that she gets called a lot is exotic, and she really hates that, because it's like she's some sort of exotic animal or butterfly or something, and she's not somehow, just a unique and beautiful human being, like everybody is a unique and beautiful human being. So she's also on a journey of finding herself, of standing up for herself, and yeah, I see her challenges, and I see the heartache that she often goes through, and sometimes I'm not always even aware of it, but I try to support her in every way I can, because I went to an all-white school. It was all English speaking, and it was a school that wasn't overtly racist because it was liberal, but it was more what it didn't do and what it didn't say than that it was, you know, it didn't sort of preach racism or anything like that, but it never actively stood up for non-racism. And all our history was still the history of the colonial overlords. It was very much about the Afrikaans domination of Africa, of South Africa, and we learned the Great Trek, I think, 100 times. And only when I got to university did I actually learn the real history of South Africa, and it was like a horror story, learning about what really was going down in my own country. And it was only really when I went to England after my degree that I also got to see Nelson Mandela's face for the first time ever, because his image was totally banned. You couldn't see him, read about him, know about him. He was just a terrorist. That's all we knew. And it was only when I got to England that I, for the first time, actually saw what Nelson Mandela looked like. So it's been such a journey for me, from being a little girl, just seeing basic human rights. I could just tell things were not right, like a very old Zulu man being served after a little white boy who was only 6 years old in a cafe, because the white boy was behind the Zulu man, but the cafe owner served the little white boy first, because pale males are A1 in South Africa. You know, we've got a whole hierarchy of inferior and superior beings, and the white male is number one. So it's been such a journey of kind of having my eyes open more and more, and my heart open more and more and more progressively. And tonight and last night, the conversations that we have are again opening me to even more subtle layers, and I've really appreciated everything that's been shared. And I feel like my role on this panel is more to listen rather than to speak a lot, because I feel white people take up a lot of space, and we talk a lot, and we want to solve everything. If there's any discomfort, we don't want it to be in our space, and so we just try and shut it down. So my role, I feel, is really to be a listener, to really learn, and to really, really get even more aware of all these layers, some of them very overt and some of them very subtle.
I must say, I love your contribution. So I hope that you don't stay a listener too often. And I was just wondering, sorry to butt in, how old is your daughter?
So she's 19 now.
Okay.
So she was born post democracy, but it was still very new when we moved back from London to South Africa. And maybe one last thing I will say, Gromik, is this is something I also only learned quite recently, but in apartheid South Africa, if a laborer or a farm worker died in suspicious circumstances, the police were able to arrive at the scene and pronounce the person deceased, and no autopsy would ever be done if it was a black person. So the police would just say, this person's died, but how they died, why they died, the police could just pronounce it a death, you know, without a pathologist doing an autopsy to see if they were murdered or if it was homicide, it just didn't happen. And I just find that so deeply shocking. The extent to which Black lives didn't matter, really didn't matter. And yeah, it's everything from that all the way to the very, very subtle nuances.
And as I hear that, and don't want to take up too much space either. But as I hear that stuff doesn't surprise me. And it seems to be, from my perspective, expected treatment and expected behavior. You look at what's happened in South Africa and what's happened in the United States, and the trauma and the violence that's committed on our Black and brown people is atrocious. And the anger that our communities walk around with, the desire to either seek revenge or to seek change is fueled by a lot of the anger from what we experience and the powerlessness that a lot of us feel in those situations. And, if you've ever had a situation with an officer or with someone who had more power than you to make decisions about what direction your world goes, those are hard situations to be in. And the older you get and experience that, the harder those kind of situations get to experience. And now with today's technology, we get to see all of that. So it just, I would hope that everyone gets to the point where we're all educated enough to see how normal this feels for Black people, whereas other folks not always are privileged to that kind of trauma, or not privileged, or exposed to that kind of trauma.
I really appreciated what Dakini, is that how you say it? Dakini? I can't, you're on mute. You're on mute.
It's Kali. It's Kali. Dakini's.
Yeah, what Kali was saying also about Mandela being portrayed as a terrorist as she was growing in school, because a similar thing happens in America with a lot of our teaching, and with the praising of Martin Luther King, and kind of like how they don't really talk much about Malcolm X, also how talk about these great Native American chiefs that signed treaties and were peaceful. But then when I started actually talking to Native Americans, they're like, those weren't our heroes. Those were the ones that sold us out, right. And it come to find out that the ones that was fighting back, the ones that fought back against, said, no, white man, you're not going to just come here and do this. They were portrayed as the savages in our classes. None of their chiefs were ever called the heroes, and so that kind of training really creates a backward sort of tale where, like anyone who fights back is the bad guy, and anyone who tried to make peace, who signed all the treaties, those were good guys because they had a good heart. But there's an undertone there. There's an undertone there that, that's not spoken of. It's like, if a nation doesn't have teeth, they're going to be demonized. If the nation doesn't have teeth, it's going to be overridden, and those who did fight back will be demonized. And I see the same thing with how we are also taught to see our own people through white eyes. When we call gang members thugs, people that fight back, people that carry guns, people that do these things, we call them all these thugs, these bandits, when we've been trained and conditioned to see them that way. We don't call the police thugs, you know what I'm saying? And then sometimes they come back with this, well, why are you asking for Black Lives Matter when you guys kill each other? Black people kill Black people, and now you want to ask cops to care about Black lives? How about you care about yourself first? But America never says, hold on, there's a lot of murder in the United States between white people too. That doesn't stop us from going to Iran and trying to take them over, and stop us from going to all these different places and trying to, take, so there's like a double standard when it comes to the people who have been conquered. And I think that's a very important thing to change, is that no one is expendable. This person you're calling a thug, that's expendable, that, you know, is trash to you, there's a lot you can learn from that person. And you have to look at your colonized mind to see what is the disconnect. Why are you calling this child who wants to fight back, who is disobedient in school, who's fighting back, the one who's going to grow up and be the freedom fighter? You see, Malcolm X was a bad kid. You know what I mean? He was in the streets. He was not this good, oh, I go to church and oh, I got all my grades in. No, he was in the streets, he was gambling, he was fighting. And then when that energy was switched around and he found out who the real enemy was, then he was able to use it to unify people and to strengthen people and show them, hey, we don't have to just take beatings, you know, for this nation. So anyway, I just wanted to bring up that point, that is often the people that we're calling chaotic or demonic or evil or bad that turn out to be bad in your favor if you can re-educate them.
Yeah. I think it's also important to point out, Monica, too, what you're saying. White folks in America did not like Martin Luther King when Martin Luther King was speaking. He was vilified when he was speaking. Anybody who was speaking out they were vilified. And it wasn't until we started to when we had, you know, Black History Month, and we started to celebrate his birthday, and they said, let's give him a little something, that we then all of a sudden, everybody's quoting Martin Luther King, everybody's quoting, they're talking about Rosa Parks. We have little people that we pick now that we will promote and we'll say that they're amazing and they're great. But in the time that they were talking, when Cesar Chavez was talking, when they were uplifting their people, nobody liked them. And that's why they were killed. I think it's important to point that out as well. So as time goes by, we can look at them and say they're heroes. But in the moment when they're rising up, not so much.
Absolutely. And they don't teach about Martin Luther King, the rebellious side of King. You know, they give us the watered down, I have a dream. No, you know, that watered down King. They don't give us the rebellious King. So I like how you brought up that point. They water him down and then reserve it to us to see he was a good one. Absolutely.
Not the later years. They don't talk about his later years. And they don't talk about Malcolm and the fact that his ideals changed and shifted when he was, you know, going more towards Pan-Africanism. It's not the same Malcolm. When he died, he was not the same Malcolm that he was when he was in the Nation of Islam.
One thing, just speaking to Renika's point about being of mixed heritage and things of that nature, I think I noticed, I don't know if you've encountered this, but a lot of my friends that had mixed heritage where they appeared more Black, you know, like they looked like what we'd stereotypically define as Black, you know, in the States. A lot of them had confusion in the younger years saying, hey, I'm this and I'm this, and I don't, you know, and I want you to know what I am. But then eventually they just were being kind of stereotyped and pushed into this Black side so much that they eventually said, you know what, I'm Black. Because when the police come, they see Black. You know, they don't say, hold on, what's your heritage? How much Irish do you have in you? How much? They say, oh, you Black like them, you over here, you know? And so a lot of them sort of kind of, as far as like in their main expression, kind of just adopted like, yo, I guess I'm part of the Black team because of how I look.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. It's just, I don't want to say that it's easier, but it's just easier. Like, I don't want to have to explain. You're going to make your assumptions. And again, unless I'm in Miami, you're not going to assume that I am Latin. Like, you're not. So I'm Black. And I make sure that my children know that they're Afro-Latina. And they're Afro-Latinos, that's what it is. We have different heritage, and we come from all over this continent. So it's important for me to then teach them that culture, but I don't get it it's just harder. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to always have to describe who and explain who you are for people to truly see you, for sure.
I feel like that's part of white supremacy's whiting out of culture.
Yeah, I think I'd like to also come in at this on this particular dimension, because I think what Zoe didn't explain, which I'm sure this well-enlightened panel is aware of, but just in case somebody's listening in the webinar, in South Africa, there was a categorization amongst the blacks. So Indians were separated as being Indian. And even at this point, because of redress through our Black economic empowerment policies, we still have to use these classifications. The point is that Indians, coloreds, and then there was a Cape colored category. So the general South African colored, and then there was a Cape colored, and then there was blacks. So I have a unique, well, I have an interesting background in the sense that my father's Zulu, but my mother was colored, but a Durban colored. And I used to go and visit my colored relatives in the colored township because everybody had to stay in their own townships. Black, and then there was a colored township. There were Indian areas. Most of the time, Indians had an opportunity to also have businesses. So they stay primarily in the CBD area. So they have a business on the ground floor and their residents on the top. And then they'd also stay in the more affluent areas because they were able to operate businesses. So I'd go and visit at the colored township and become aware very sharply that I am definitely not one of them. So the things that Renika and Kali have mentioned with regards to your complexion and your hair and all of that stuff, I had to also go through. What is also interesting to point out is that it became a bit of a challenge to then determine where do I belong. So I also had to default to the lowest denominator because I was never quite colored enough. And besides, it's my father was Zulu, so I am, according to our culture, more about my father because even my surname is his surname. And I became a lot more comfortable with assuming that as my grounding and my belonging and working from there. So now and again, I still even now get questions with regards to my accent. Where did I grow up? Are you South African? Are you maybe from Zimbabwe? Or did I go to a Model C school, like a kind of a mixed school or private school? But it's just because I actually had this opportunity to experience the two cultures, which affected me in terms of how I see myself, and it affected me in terms of how I relate to my appearance as well as my internal value system. However, it also presented me with enlightenment and with an awareness that I began to hone and sharpen and broaden at a very, very tender age. So a lot of the time, people don't have the need to worry about this, but I actually had an early awareness, and it actually honed my, call it emotional intelligence, with regards to my identity and my self-value.
Thank you, Gromik. It's a lot of my experience as well. It's quite similar to that around I like to see the bright side of things. I'm told by Whitney that I spin things to myself, a lot of the time, and I spun that whole not belonging to one or the other as, oh, well, I'm a bridge. I'm a bridge between two different spaces, and how wonderful to be able to be a bridge. And while I don't think it's just a spin, I think it's valuable as well. There have been times, and there's still come time between in our relating, where I see the sense of a lack of worth and value, which for me, I remember at the age of 5.5 having an experience where I was not allowed into a space because of the color of my skin. Like Whitney said also, my sister is, as she's fair, you know, as fair as you, Carly, she could be white, and they said, please come in, you can come in. My mother could come in, but I couldn't come in. My brother couldn't come in, my father couldn't come in. And as a 5.5-year-old, that was the first time I got to see that this world wasn't really made for me. I didn't have access to everything that this world had to offer. And to have that as a first imprint of the world, I started to see later on, not immediately, but later on, as I started to unpack what it is I wanted to do and feel and be in this world, was that those moments, that was the first I remember, and then there were others, but those little moments of just like, you be in your place, don't come out of your place, stay where you are. And it's something, looking at the riots, especially in America recently, this quality of people going, well, they don't know, they shouldn't be rioting in that way. You know, there's a way to riot, which is not apparently breaking down stores and creating fires, and you know, there's this sense of you stay in your place, you riot the way you're supposed to riot, and then we'll listen to you. And it's just, it boggles my mind still, as I feel into how this can be for so many people in this world, how it can be that there is such an ingrained sense of not belonging.
And I just want to comment on the word riot, because again, it's a colonial mindset that people who are making a ruckus about something are rioting, which is a negative word. A bit like when Montague spoke about slaves, you know, like they were just slaves already, and they were brought from Africa as slaves to just be in America as slaves, rather than they were farmers and doctors and medicine people and all the things that people are in their lives, and they were enslaved. And rioting sounds like bad people. And even unrest, you could sort of say, is maybe less derogatory, but it's actually an uprising. It's an uprising of consciousness. It's an uprising of people saying, I've had enough of inequality, of injustice, of prejudice, of being treated like an inferior human being, from the most subtle to the most overt. And so I think we should even check our language all the time, because it is like terrorist versus freedom fighter, you know. Yeah. It's like we are actually even still using the language of the oppressor on ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that.
I mean, it's exactly what Tyrone was speaking about yesterday. You know, the whole system is rigged around using this language and forming certain concepts in a certain way that still re-traumatizes, and that the everything is still the same. We're still stuck in the same pattern because of that, because we're using that language. I wanted to speak a little bit about this dynamic of being a bridge, of being like the in-between, because I also feel that as well, being, having a certain culture um, and then being exposed to a different set of values, because I think it also comes down to that. It's like, what are the values that we want to create in our communities and in our lives? And obviously European values and European culture, because it's so strong and it's what we get in media and in school and everything, that is then, and in my experience, that is what I've been kind of stuck in this perpetuating European culture, and not really being conscious about my other culture, my initial primary mother tongue culture, and how we move between these worlds, and which one is important. And of course, as I was growing up, I didn't, I just naturally navigated towards European culture, because it's like, oh, well, that's better, that's better. And it's only now that uncovering the value systems that sit within, the Zulu culture, African culture, and now where I'm embarrassed in many ways, and also but also I'm excited, and I'm like, wow, the value systems, this being in between, allows me access to a multitude and complex value systems which we've lost, and which have been demonized, by European thinking. And at the same time, there are parts of it that are fine, that are okay, but it's just recognizing which value system we really want to be with, and I guess the dilemma of existing between both worlds, or a multitude of worlds, and not just one or two, but people come from so many different value systems that are that need to be present, that need to come into the conversation, that we're not just talking about European value systems, and forming a conversation in that way. So it's complex again. Yeah.
I think that's powerful what you're saying about it. It almost shows that there's kind of two worlds. There's this, and all of us, I believe, probably aren't like in this world of like, oh, it's black and white on the inside. I'm sure we all kind of resonate with various aspects of our cultures, and it just goes to show you how even blackness is a response to white supremacy in a sense. You know what I mean? It's like we've all been lumped. It's like, you're black. You're like, but get in the car. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God. And so like, when at one time we were Yoruba, we were Hausa, we were Zulu, we were these tribes, and then we were forced into like being like, no, you're one thing, and this is how you're going to behave, and this is how you're going to adopt this language where everything that's black is below, and white is above. So devil's food cake is always chocolate, angel food cake is white, blackballed, all these terms like in the English language, black is evil, and then they slap us with the white image of Christ, and they're like, this is your God. My great grandmother always had that picture of just a white Jesus up, and she would be furious, because in the new way we were catching on to, like, oh wait, the scripture said he has hair like lamb's wool, and his skin was like burnt bronze. You better not say that around Granny. She'd be like, what? Boy, you better stop listening to the devil. You know what I mean? And so, because then there's that devil though, that dark, that's that dark knowledge. Don't go there. We need to stay on the surface, and white Jesus will protect us, and it just shows you how important it was for us to learn the language, get the religion, you know what I mean, and then be placed in a system that kind of congealed us in a place where we didn't have much power.
Yeah, I think what Nola said really resonated with me in terms of value system. When we think about race, we think about it just in terms of your alignment within society. But we don't think about this idea of conquer and divide, right? And that's really what it was about, and grouping folks in different groups to be able to define their roles in society. And I think one thing that we have to note is it's a lot deeper than that. There's a psychological warfare that we begin to perpetuate as well amongst each other. And that's based off of when you don't see yourself, you begin to divide from everything that's not you. And you can see that in sports teams. Oh, this is my sport team. That's your sport team. I have to go against you. This is my neighborhood. That's your neighborhood. I have to go against you. So anything that you are not, you fight against. And that's what race does. As we know, it's a social construct. And that's exactly what it is. It's socially constructing us to perform and do exactly what we're doing. So the conversations that we have about it are doing exactly what they wanted in the first place. And we haven't had any kind of conversations that can go past that. So we begin to reproduce what we don't want, even within the conversations that we have discussing it. And I think one time I heard something that was really profound. It was said that we're all born looking like our mothers and fathers, but we die looking like our decisions. And I think from a yogic lens, we have to look at that statement as going to war with ourselves and killing all the toxic behavior that we have within us. And what that looks like is anything that brings any kind of poisonous values that don't promote our humanity. And those are the things that I feel like are lost when we have these conversations. What's not promoting our humanity is anything that's trying to harm someone else because of their identity or how we've grouped them into certain positions in society, and begin to perpetuate that pain that we don't want to see. I shared this on the last panel. My mother, when she was pregnant with me, walking down the street, she was attacked by four white men with glass bottles and bottle caps, and threw them at her while she was pregnant with me. And she tells me this story and just talks about the pain, and being 16 years old, working at a ice cream shop. I had to fight this Aryan guy. I didn't know it, and I worked with his wife, and I worked with her for quite some time, and we were just living life. And then come to find out, this is how she aligns. So you never know who's right next to you. And I think it's so much deeper than the conversations that we have about it, and the way that we also contribute to it because of the language and the lack of understanding of the psychological warfare that goes on within it. We're not talking about country when we're saying black. So what does black really mean? I think Montague said this yesterday, and there's a movie called Slaves with Ozzie Davis in it. And there's a scene in that movie where the slave master says, black is not a color, it's a condition. And that's exactly what they put us in, is different conditions, and we perform in those conditions, and we begin to take on that image as though that's the condition that we were designed to be in because of it. So I think we have to look at it from the psychological warfare that's taking place within us, and it begins to influence our behavior on a day-to-day basis. And that's where the self-hatred comes from. So that's where we have to go to war with ourselves to be able to kill anything that they created within our minds.
That reminds me of, the work that we have to consistently do every day on ourselves and every day with each other to combat that which you were talking about will require a great deal of self-esteem, self-discipline, commitment to doing the right things for yourself to bring about health and wellness and healing in your life, right? So as I think about everything that Bev just was talking about right there, all that stuff is happening to us 24/7. It's happening to us in multiple ways. It's happening to us on multiple levels, on multiple frequencies, on multiple wavelengths. How are we going to protect ourselves, and how are we going to recreate ourselves and transform our minds and transform our experience? And it's only through our commitment to doing the opposite. It reminds me of what Bob Marley said after he got shot. Bob Marley got shot, and then he went and did a show the next day, and someone interviewed him and said, you just got shot, why are you doing this? He said, the guys who want to do harm in this world or evil in this world never take a day off. So neither can I, you know? And we got to go to work, and we got to commit ourselves to doing the work internally and sharing that work with others and creating pathways for them to do that work. And we got to continually reinvent and be conscious of the ways in which we're trying to be divided and killed and separated for the purposes of control. And I think I'm encouraged by that, what you just said, Tyrone. I'm encouraged by these conversations. I'm encouraged by connecting with people from South Africa who have a similar experience, because we can learn something from each other, and we can keep connecting with each other and keep building processes and ways in which we can heal, and we can provide spaces to heal for those around us every day.
Every day. I love that. And yeah, absolutely. I love that whole idea of connecting, you know, across the waters. You know what I mean? I hope everybody here friends me on Facebook. My name is Montague Connolly. Also, I want to also point out the importance of, you know, how impressionable we are as young people, and how we're like clay, and like literally our minds bend to what we get, you know. And I just, the reason that came up is because Dewan brought up Bob Marley. And I remember being in high school and hearing some ludicrous song, and forgive me for the title of this song, but I think it was Pimpin' All Over the World. Anyway, he was talking about how all over the world he meets all these women. And but I remember in the last part of his song, because he's going through, he's talking about the beautiful women he's seen all around the world, and at the very end he says, you ain't, something like, it goes without asking, bruh, the best women all reside in Africa. And, you know, the song was, of course, a racy, sort of raunchy song, but like him saying that changed our whole minds in an instant, because we had never heard someone say that beautiful women lived in Africa. And all of a sudden, just that word, it just shows the empowerment, like our words when we spell, you know, like spelling, they're like spells we're casting, you know, these words we use, you know, are very important. It's important for us to speak life over each other, speak beauty over each other, teach the people, say, no, these people are beautiful, you know. It's to reverse that narrative, because that went, as racy and raunchy as that song was, that went deep into all the people that heard it. We're like, wait, they are? And so you start Googling, you're like, wow, they are beautiful, you know. But I never stopped to look at African women. It was always, oh, the Latina beautiful, or the, you know, the white women that on the Pantene Pro V commercials, you know what I mean? That's kind of what was promoted. And so I just wanted to go into like how a lot of human beings at different stages of our lives, it's like we need certain words to give us permission to see what's really there. And the other piece I like that Dewan brought up was the health and wellness piece. It's like, what are all the tools we have so that we're not having these emotional reactions, not being able to really think and like be present with our pain. You know, a lot of us move, but then we find thoughts to back up that movement. We don't really know why we did it, or we'll create, I'm smoking because I had a long day. No, you're smoking because you're addicted to cigarettes. You're not smoking because, you know what I mean? Like we just create these thoughts that make it okay. And like, you know, how do we integrate these systems, this yoga, the herbs, the, you know, the chakra work, you know, the singing, the speaking life over ourselves, the affirmations, in ways that help us to be able to say, oh, I'm not going to just react. Let me be present and in the now.
I just wanted to just say, you know, I just love this discussion, because it's going back to the body, you know, it's going back to the body, and you know, the words that we say, the language that we use for ourselves, you know, and I think when I'm thinking about my journey around healing and healing all of this, and my experience of being a Black woman in this world, it takes time, you know, and you know, there's a lot of uncovering of shame, there's a lot of uncovering of so many things, and I have to remind myself all the time to be compassionate with myself, to be compassionate of how much time it actually takes. You know, it's not just a switch of a button and then here we are. And like Dwayne says, you know, it's like a continual everyday thing where we have to be vigilant, you know, and disciplined. And this is a lot, you know, and I just want to put in compassion in it, because it's like these bodies which have been traumatized in so many ways, and now we want to use words that are like, oh, I know that I'm love, I know that I am joy, I know that I am bliss, I know that I am these amazing things, and when I say that, to know that my body wants to respond to that, and that this reprogramming of our systems, it does take time, but it is something that we continuously really need to do. Reprogram, relearning, you know, knowing ourselves as beautiful beings when we haven't been taught that from our system, from our school system, is quite a journey in itself. Learning to use the right language. It takes time, and to just be gentle with ourselves and be compassionate to that learning body that is wanting to be conscious, and consciousness, you know, takes however long that it takes. And obviously this is a lifelong journey. It's not just, you know, we in it until we die. That's it. Yeah, I just wanted to just honor that it just to build in that compassion within us, and when we speak to each other, to not also like you know, because I know in my sometimes environment, it's like, oh you, as a Black person, you don't know this, you don't know that, and it's like to really gently bring each other in a way that recognizes that everybody's at different places of awareness and consciousness, and that we really need to be each other's allies in being conscious, in becoming conscious.
Yeah. And as you speak about the environment, external environment, I think about our internal environment of our bodies and all the microaggressions, all of our past, our ancestral past, all of it is coming through and creating environments for illness to set in. And when we think about COVID itself and disproportionately affecting Black and brown folks around the world, when there's the environment that their bodies have taken just from the social aspects, the social illnesses that they're getting just for being who they are and showing up in the skin that they have every single day, it does take a lot of work. So that way we can battle and mitigate the social effects within our body, so we can help to prevent some illnesses that are going on. So I think that's also important to note that, you know, with epigenetics, it's all about the environment that you're creating inside your body. It's not just about the genes that you got from your parents. If I'm sad and lonely and depressed, that's going to create the environment for certain genes to be expressed. It's not necessarily that I have this gene and this, I'm going to get this illness, or I'm more, I might be more predisposed to get it. But if my environment is healthy, if I'm eating the right foods, if I'm telling myself the right things, if I'm taking in the correct information, if I'm exercising, there's a good likelihood that I won't ever experience the same illnesses that my parents have or my family lineage has. So, you know, it's really important to think about what is all these things, what is the effect in our internal body, and how does it manifest in illnesses and disease.
Yeah,
love
I
how
like
the-
the point. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Gromit.
Okay. I like the point you're making there, Klinika, because as a coach, I help people to raise their game and to have longevity and leave a legacy, having a lasting impact. That is part of what really is my passion in doing the work. And then I use a formula that does cover the dimensions that you've mentioned. But what I'd like to do now is to highlight something quite embracing, in the sense that um, from the appreciation of ourselves as the internal, as the human. Research is showing through neuroscience, because I've done a course to coach based on neuroscience research, that as human beings, our primary requirement, our primary form of survival is being social. And if you look at the way we have been chasing a culture that is misguided and misdirected, you will find that it's now making a turn in terms of trends, and there's now talk of Ubuntu, which is an African value system, which is the most intrinsic, which says that I am who I am because I am part of our society, our community. I am because you are. And the essence in that is, I agree that we need to stay connected, and I think we need to continue to do the work together. But what is most important is that we actually have the key. Part of the benefit of going through challenges, just like diamond is forged through pressure and great challenges, we have become that much more resilient because of our circumstances, and we have the potential to become that much more enlightened because we can appreciate things at a deeper level, and we are not scared of divorcing ourselves or surviving without the security of the material and other physical, tangible things. So there is a lot that we can offer the world. And if we were to see ourselves as really the ones, and that we can actually make a contribution, we can follow through in Tyrone viewpoint, which is that we don't need to be imprisoned and shackled by what they try to do to us. We have something a lot more powerful, a lot more resilient. I mean, if you look at the suicide percentages in the world, you won't find that in African countries. You find that in the countries that are supposed to have it all. They are supposed to be the wealthiest, the most advanced, the first world countries. But those people are not happy. They don't have it. But we can have that happiness. We can have that fulfillment and contentment without all of those material things.
Yeah, I love how you bring Ubuntu in. I am because you are, and it takes 2 fingers to pick up a grain of sand and a village to raise a child. And those beautiful, it's a really deep philosophy of humanism, which again in the colonial dominator mindset was just seen as inferior and of no value, and yet it is the most heart-centered, most beautiful human philosophy that is endemic to Africans in Africa. And I also love how Zola's bringing the conversation into the body, because today is about the internal landscape. And what I'm finding is the spiritual practice of being in my heart and my womb. When my awareness is resting in my heart and my womb, and my mind isn't leading, that the mind sits below the heart in service of the heart, it's much harder to be conditioned it's much harder for anyone to control me and tell me who I should be or what I should think if I'm not resting in my neocortex, but I'm resting in my heart and my womb, because I find that the body is wild and the body knows the truth. It knows universal truth. It knows source. But the mind is plastic and pliable and very linked to the nervous system and to survival. And those neural pathways get deeper and deeper and deeper with conditioning. And then we never examine those core belief systems, the filters that we're looking through. And it does take an entire lifetime actually to dismantle those filters, for them to come into view. With luck, they start to come into view. But the more I rest in my body, the more I rest in my heart and my womb, not as a thought that I'm resting in my heart and my womb, but I'm actually resting there, connected to the earth. The more those filters, those unexamined filters that I've been looking at life through and assuming to be the truth of reality, slowly start to come into view. And I can start to see them and ask, do they serve? You know, are they helping to make my life more beautiful to myself and to everyone around me? Or are these old, outdated, dysfunctional, redundant belief systems that are not serving at all? And as spiritual practitioners, this is for me one of the biggest parts of the puzzle, is to keep coming back to the body. And the more we sort of in the head, the more separate we are, but the more we're in our bodies, the more there's a real and meaningful connection and a flow that starts to open up.
Ooh.
I really like what Kali was saying right there about the mind body connection, and just two things really quick. I feel like it's important to also, and now more than ever, teach our youth, teach people that are on the path that we're multidimensional. We're multidimensional beings. You know, there's some of us that get caught up in our heads and think just with affirmations we can change it around. You know what I mean? But sometimes it's a body thing. You know, sometimes there's something going off chemically. You know what I mean? That needs to be adjusted so that the spirit and the mind can rest on top of that. You know, it can go, in my experience, it can go either way. You know, where some people definitely need some sort of herb. You know, sometimes there's an herb that can remind the body, hey, do you remember when we used to do things like this? You know, it seems like the herbs are like negotiators. You know, they go in and they say, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember when your heart used to beat this way? And your body's like, oh yeah, I remember that hawthorn berry, you know? And then all of a sudden there's this link, and all of a sudden everything starts aligning on top of that. But when we think, oh, I just got to think clear, I just got to think harder, I just got to change my thoughts. Sometimes there's not enough support underneath for the mind to work properly. And I just think it's very important for us to also form these deep ties and deep alliances with our local environments, you know, so that we're not so stuck on, oh, what can the hospital give me? You know, what can the supermarket give me? You know what I mean? But like, how can I process the herbs in my vicinity, you know, so that I'm taking in things that are wild like I am?
You know, as we talk about what it means to do this work, and I think about what it takes to master something and what it takes to become masters of ourselves and masters at connecting to nature and connecting to the world around us. I start thinking about Malcolm Gladwell's definition of mastery, right? 10,000 hours, right? And you start thinking about what are you a master at? What are we all masters at? We all mastered walking. We all mastered going to the restroom. Like, we all mastered eating, right? We've mastered some of the simplest things in our world, which are the blueprint for us to master the more complex things that exist in our world. And I think about how many times do we put together a 5-10 year plan for who our spiritual selves will be down the road? Do we put a 5 to 10 year plan around who our, what my personality, what I want to build into that? We'll do that for our body. We'll do that for our look or our financial situation. But we need to engage in the work of becoming masters of all aspects of who we are internally as individuals, which may mean connecting to nature, which may mean taking some herbs and learning what exists in the world around you that can help you heal, because everything we need is already inside of us. The question is, do we know how to do the work to manifest it? And I'm encouraged by this conversation because I'm ready to go to work with y'all. I want to go do this work.
Let's do it.
I'm ready to go. This is hype me up, because this is where if we're not right in ourselves, if we're not connected on this level where we are understand each and every one of us how we have to proceed towards mastery, then we are a strong unit that is going out to bring change, to dismantle systems of oppression, to dismantle systems that create disease, and to reinstitute or put into place new systems that do the exact opposite.
I love what you're saying about the mastery. And a lot of that, once again, comes with awareness. I remember I used to be a big fan of Captain Crunch when I was a little kid. For those that don't know, Captain Crunch, it's a sugary cereal that you eat. You put milk in it, and you just go off to school. And I would eat this Captain Crunch, and I would be like, wow, I ate part of a complete breakfast. That was what was on the box. It said part of a complete breakfast. But then I'd go to school and I'd feel jittery. I'd be hungry in like 20 minutes, and through a lot of analysis, I realized that I was never feeding the body. I was feeding my emotions. And when I realized I was using my body as a vehicle to feed some joyous emotions, but my body was still starving, it made me start to ask, what other aspects of myself am I starving, thinking that I'm serving? In how many ways am I thinking that I'm serving my spirit, but serving my ego? How many ways am I, like, all these different dimensions? How do I make sure that I'm honing in on feeding these different aspects of myself very clearly, and that I'm not overlooking something? And I think that comes with what Dewan is saying about the mastery and going in deep into each realm and finding out what is being fed there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I value in terms of my corporate experiences is having worked with the premier brand here in terms of food in South Africa called Woolworths. I was running the operations department for the food division, but I actually had an interest in food technology, just out of curiosity. And one of the things that I picked up from being exposed to one of the guest presenters, her name is Sally Ann Creed. She's written a book called Let Food Be Your Medicine. Basically, she had such a significant illness in her past that she was taking a range of medication with another range to counter the side effects of her primary medication. And when it became that confusing and that complex and that revolting in her body, she decided to re-look at the process. And that's when she began to become a foodie. And she now preaches using food as your medicine. And if there's anything that we can do in terms of ensuring our sustenance, and our health, and not falling into the general category of our comorbidity challenges, is to really have a different spiritual relationship with what we put into ourselves. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from going back to how it was done in the past, because the commercial modern way has a lot more going wrong with it. There's a lot more that they're putting into it that is not supposed to come into our system, and we're dealing with cancers and a lot. I'll leave it there.
I love how this conversation is really going into so many different areas of kind of the slave mentality, because sugar, whenever a dominator culture went into an indigenous culture, they would often enslave them with sugar, because it is like a drug. And in South Africa, we had a terrible system with the wine farms here in South Africa, where the laborers were paid with alcohol, which of course is nothing more than sugar. And it was called the dop system, because a dop is a drink in Afrikaans. And so the dop system was the laborers would be paid in alcohol. They would of course become alcoholics. And we still to this day have the highest level of alcohol fetal syndrome in the world. Children born basically as alcoholics because their parents are alcoholics and their parents were alcoholics. And what a brilliant way to enslave people. What a brilliant way to keep people, from reaching their full potential. Just turn them into sugar addicts. And if you look at the level of sugar in all our food in the supermarkets, it's outrageous. It's crazy. And so this is another form of enslavement, another form of keeping people from realizing their fullest potential.
We have 7 minutes tonight left. And I think, Montague, you are not able to join us tomorrow, is that right?
Right.
Okay. So if unless anybody has any objection, I would love to hear from you. You have already shared quite a lot of your suggestions, which have been entertaining, and I think that you have a real gift of making your point in a really beautiful way without the shame and the guilt and the aggression, and I really appreciate that. I just wanted to say that separately before you go and we don't get to talk tomorrow. But in these next minutes, if you would share any other thoughts that you may have about kind of where the solutions on a greater scale, on a personal scale, on a grand scale, and also maybe you can leave us with one really precise, if you have one really precise focus that you think as a takeaway, in addition to everything else you shared.
Yeah, thank you. It's been beautiful getting to know all of you and reconnecting with some of you that I didn't know before. Thank you for making some space for me to talk, and it's just beautiful to be here and part of these discussions, because I learned so much. I learned so much from everyone here, and I'm humbled by your wisdom. And I look forward to following you guys and learning even more, because it's going to be a team effort. There's no one savior coming to save all of us, and I think that's one of the hardest realizations for a lot of us that were raised in a very religious way, because growing up it's like, oh baby, don't worry about it. Jesus is going to come fix it in a minute. And then when we come to realize that, well, in my opinion, that God or gods or vibrations, they need containers. And what I mean by that is that if we don't have the right information, then the spirit, it's a lot harder for spirit to use us as tools. If we don't have the right hearts, it's a lot harder for spirit to use us as tools. In the same way that, you know, a cup made out of holes, you know, won't hold water. You know, no matter how much you pray over it, you bless it, and you want the spiritual water to get into your body, there's no water there because there's holes. And so, you know, going into ourselves and saying, okay, how do we create systems that can hold spirit? How do we go into ourselves and create minds and bodies that can hold spirit so that it can move us and work with us? How do we become worthy tools? So we're not blaming something when we're the broken tool. You know, when we're not unifying, when we've given into disunity and distrust and hate and colorism within our own ranks, you know, all these different things, you know, it's all about a type of purification that's going to have to go into our work and what we put into ourselves. And I think everything starts on a ground level. I think that things are shifting. Eventually things are going to be moving to where instead of from the top down, things are going to be moving from the ground up. And that is the shift that's happening. Things are being flipped on their head. And that's why it's important for us to get localized, you know, because that's where it starts. It's not going to start like, hey, begging a governor, begging this person for this to change. It's going to start in your own backyard. And so people who are listening to this, one thing I highly recommend is accountability groups. Start small, even if it's just you and your wife or you and your husband or you and your kids, whatever. Get with someone, some partner or some partners, whether they're in the neighborhood or in your house, and say, hey, these are our goals. Okay, and I'm going to hold you accountable because these are the things that you said you were going to do. And these are things I said I want to do. You know, so I'm not holding you accountable for something you didn't want to do. You know, these are things that are going to make us better. These are things that are going to make the community get better that we both agreed on. These are your own hopes and dreams, because I believe that procrastination is killing us as well. You know, when you're in school, you constantly have a deadline. So you produce all this stuff, and then you become an adult, and there's no one hanging over your shoulder saying, "Did you accomplish that book? You know, did you do the meeting?" You know, and so sometimes it's good for some of us to have an accountability group. Also, becoming familiar with the plants in your region, I believe, is very important. I know I'm an herbalist, so I'm biased, but I've seen amazing turnarounds in people by just that didn't know they were lacking some mineral, for example. You know, they thought they were just crazy. Come to find out they have a magnesium deficiency. And now that they have the magnesium in their system, they're able to hold thoughts better and able to rest better and get more sleep. There's people that thought they were always going to have anxiety, where I introduced them to a certain leaf or a combination of leaves or a change in their system that allowed for a better, allowed for their mind and their heart to open in various ways. So we can't forget our alliances, not just with the plants, but with the animals as well. You know, because one thing that we've seen about human beings is that one of our greatest strengths is one of our greatest weaknesses. And one of those strengths is our ability to create abstract realities. But in creating these abstract realities, you know, we lose connection with the earth and the one reality that feeds us. You know, we get caught up in, oh, you're different, I'm different, everything's different, you know, and I create this way of doing it this way. And sometimes we're so far out that's why a lot of the cultures that are in with the bush, you know, that work in nature, they always have some sort of totem animal to remind them how they move on the planet, you know. And so those are some of my big takeaways is, what can you do now? What can you do in your circle? You know, how can we empower people today and get rid of this white myth as well in the next generation? Like, no, you are not white. You know, there's nothing to protect, you know, but more hardship. Like Gromik said, he said, you know, it's these super developed, civilized nations where everyone's they're killing themselves. You know, it's where the highest rate of depression is, the highest rate of suicide. All these things are happening, and it's because there's you're at the quote unquote top that we've created, but there's no connection to the real ground. So there's this hole that can never be fed. That's where you get this imperialism, you know what I mean? Keep taking, oh, we got to take more, we're almost there. It never ends. You know, and we got to get to the root of that. And I believe it's in connecting to the earth in all our various ways, connecting with our bodies, connecting with our spirits, identifying ourselves as multidimensional beings as well. And yeah, that's probably my 7 minutes.
Yeah, just about. But you have. But yeah, that is awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate. Yeah, absolutely.
And that was beautiful, Montague. I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
You talked about somebody developing accountability partners. What if someone's goals are not in alignment with their overall growth as a human?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So when we're looking at accountability groups, I'm talking from the perspective of someone who's finding like minds. You know, so if you have an accountability, you're not gonna. So as Tyrone Beverly, you're not gonna find an accountability partner that doesn't have values that that help you to expand. Because the whole idea is to start here, and then maybe a third person comes on, or maybe another person with similar values starts their own. Then another person with similar values starts theirs, and it starts to create sort of its own vibration. To hopefully, by the time it gets to the person that doesn't have a system, or not a system, but a way of life that is helping their self, hopefully by that time they're saying like, wow, look at the movement. It's just like, for example, we can use the Nation of Islam, for example. You know, I know they have their problems, but, you know, there was a time when people would have said, what the heck is that? You know, but in time, through small groups, they grew into a bigger group where people on the street were like, yo, how do I become part of that? And then their minds changed. So I'm looking at it like from that perspective.
So I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a different way. So working with some young people, some young teenagers, sometimes when I talk to them and I talk to them about values, some of them say they don't know what they value, and they haven't been exposed to some of the information that we are all talking about today. So how do they arrive at that place in their life where they're really putting their energy into things that are going to improve their overall lived experience when they haven't been exposed to it? So what would your suggestion be to them?
Okay, so I believe there's kind of two
around
ways
not being exposed and not knowing what you value in life. Like, how would you help them develop what they value?
Yeah, well, one of those ways is by kind of meeting them where they're at. You know, I feel like a big problem is some of us get to a level where we're just so disconnected from the youth. We don't know any of their songs. You know, we don't know what they're paying attention to. We're just completely disconnected. So we look like some outsider trying to enforce our own will upon them. When in fact there are ways, there's people that are hot, for example, rappers right now. There's very hot rappers, that will put little gems in there, you know, and like I found when I worked with the youth that they would respond well if I met them where they were at and moved out of that. For example, you know, when I worked at this youth correction facility, you know, a lot of them were smoking marijuana and they thought marijuana was cool. So then how do I connect? Hey, marijuana is cool. Let's talk about what marijuana does. You can make it into a salve. You can rub it on your skin, and it's a pain reliever. It has all these qualities. Oh my God, did you know there's other plants that are also nervines? There's other plants that work on the nerves too. And we started building around that. Before you know it, there's this whole medicine cabinet that they knew about. These quote unquote thugs were all of a sudden like, yo, what's up with the skull cap though for the headache? My mom gets this migraine, blah, blah. It's just this slow pulling meeting where they are at. You know, going into a Kendrick Lamar rap verse, J. Cole rap verse, going into these different places and starting to pull out these things. It's like taking something small and expanding upon it and making them think that it's their choice. You know, when you finally give the assignment, hey, you can either do it this way or do this way. There's these two paths, but it's really within the framework of where you want them to go. It's what we call the Brer Rabbit trick. It's where you give somebody what they want, but you know on the back end, that is taking them where you think they should go. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
So thank you all. This was beautiful and juicy tonight, heartfelt. And please stay for Ernestine. She'll be on in 20 minutes. Amazing, beautiful songstress of the soul from beautiful Africa. So if you can, please stay. And thank you, everyone else who is watching and listening. Thank you for your years.
Yes, we will shut down this meeting just to open up a new one so that there's a practice session so Ernestine can get her tech ready and sound checks everything. So please just rejoin. And if you're an attendee, and participants will also be able to rejoin immediately. So if you have the time, we'd love to see you. And then also, I have a link for our GoFundMe. And so if anybody, any of the participants or people listening on Facebook Live, anybody would be able to give some donations, all of that will go to all the participants here and the people providing the music and the movement as well, the health warriors out of South Africa, who are a group of it's an organization that teaches underprivileged people within the different communities in South Africa, yoga and meditation and dance and different things, and teaches them to become teachers and to open their own spaces. So they also, tomorrow, will have another session with them, a dance yoga session, and then we'll also be sharing the Tantra yoga as well, and all of that is on our Sva-Tantra website, sva-tantra, tantra.org, so you can find all that stuff. So thank you all, and we'll see you hopefully we'll see you in a little while.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So,